Earning your degree online doesn't mean you have to go about it alone. At Capella University, we're here to support you when you're ready. From enrollment counselors who get to know you and your goals, to academic coaches who can help you form a plan to stay on track. We care about your success and are dedicated to helping you pursue your goals. Going back to school is a big step, but having support at every step of your academic journey can make a big difference. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits, including personal shoutouts, early access to episodes, bonus episodes, and more. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note, sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. Let's start with a bit of trivia. Did you know, on average, Friday the 13th occurs once every 212.35 days, or just shy of twice per year? This year, it happens twice, in September and December. Though the superstition surrounding Friday the 13th goes back several centuries, and may even have religious connections, more recent decades have brought it into the mainstream. On May 9th, 1980, Friday the 13th was released in movie theaters across the United States. It was a massive success, grossing nearly $60 million worldwide, against a budget of just $550,000. The low-budget slasher flick would go on to spawn 11 sequels, each centered around its infamous main villain, the machete-wielding, hockey mask-wearing Jason Voorhees. In an era full of horror movie killers, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, and Chucky, to name a few, Jason Voorhees was unique, as his backstory almost made him a tragic figure. But make no mistake, the terror he wrought and the violence he inflicted are nothing to cheer for. And while most of us who enjoy horror movies would not consider a killer like Jason Voorhees to be a role model or someone worth emulating, there are some who do. Some, like Mark Branch, who in 1988 committed a horrifying act and claimed his obsession with Friday the 13th was to blame. In this episode of The Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the terrifying Friday the 13th murder committed by Mark Branch. But what compelled him to commit such a heinous crime? I'll share the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. Massachusetts, is a small city approximately 40 miles north of Springfield and 2 hours west of Boston. According to 2020 census data, Greenfield had a population of just under 18,000. But Crime Grade reported Greenfield had a slightly higher than average rate of crime, and it's currently in the 31st percentile for overall safety. For clarity, this means 69% of cities are safer than Greenfield, and 31% are more dangerous. Perhaps the most infamous crime in Greenfield took place on October 24, 1988, when 18-year-old Mark Branch murdered 18-year-old Sharon Gregory. There are few details about Mark Branch's early life, but it is known that he struggled with his mental health and had been under psychiatric care for several years. One article stated, quote, "He had sought treatment at a Boston psychiatric hospital after leaving the New Salem Academy, a private school, 6 weeks into the school year in 1984. End quote. It was reported that while attending high school, Mark Branch, quote, kept files about the girls in his high school and used these while making obscene phone calls to them in the evenings. Branch also allegedly wrote notes to the girls where he explained in gruesome detail how he would kill them." End quote. By all accounts, Mark Branch began displaying concerning and scary behavior long before he committed murder. In fact, Mark Branch's friends commented later that he would often wonder aloud what it would be like to kill someone. It's important to establish this at the start, because while trying to determine the cause of Branch's murderous attack on Sharon Gregory, many pointed to his obsession with horror movies. According to a video store clerk in Greenfield, Mark Branch had an obsession with gory slasher movies, stating, quote, "He rented strictly gore, period. The gorier, the better." End quote. More specifically, Mark Branch was obsessed with the Friday the 13th film series and its fictional killer, Jason Voorhees. Something interesting. When police searched Mark Branch's home, they found, quote, "a veritable monument to horror." They reportedly recovered 75 slasher films, 64 killer-related books, 3 knives, a machete, and 3 goalie masks. End quote. Mark Branch's obsession with horror movies may be the reason for Sharon Gregory contacting him. A student at nearby Greenfield Community College, she decided to write a paper on his horror movie obsession for a Psychology 101 class. What we do know is Sharon Gregory was intrigued by Mark Branch and asked to complete a psychological profile on him. Something interesting. After the murder, the police were unable to confirm whether Gregory had completed the psychological profile. It's possible she told Mark Branch that she would complete it, and he wanted it, to the point of committing murder to get it. One article, quoting Greenfield Police Chief David McCarthy, stated, quote, "Sharon Gregory had in her possession a psychological profile of Mark Branch, and that profile was wanted badly by Mark Branch. He didn't like her having it, and he wanted it." End quote. While we don't know the exact reasons for Sharon Gregory's interest in Mark Branch, or if she actually completed the psychological profile, we do know he became upset with her. On October 24, 1988, Mark Branch entered Sharon Gregory's home. There, he chased the startled Gregory to an upstairs bathroom. What happened next is the stuff of nightmares. Inside the bathroom, Mark Branch brutally stabbed Sharon Gregory to death. She had wounds to her head, chest, back, and abdomen. No one knows exactly what happened since she was home alone when Branch entered and attacked her. But we do know something else. When Mark Branch entered Sharon Gregory's home, he was dressed as Jason Voorhees. He wore the trademark hockey mask and black boots. His obsession with Friday the 13th and its titular character moved from fantasy to real life, with unimaginable and tragic consequences. Sometime later, Cheryl Gregory, Sharon's twin sister, entered the home, where she found Sharon's mutilated body in the bathtub. Mark Branch was nowhere to be found. He disappeared long before. It would be over a month before he was found, his body hanging by his bootlaces and belt from a tree in the woods. Let's pause for a moment before diving deeper. Cursory research reveals the details I've shared up to this point, and for me at least, brings more questions than answers. Here are a few that came to mind. How did Mark Branch and Sharon Gregory come to know each other? What compelled Mark Branch to murder Sharon Gregory? How did the police connect Sharon Gregory's murder to Mark Branch? And what happened to Mark Branch after the murder? In one way or another, these questions, and a few more, were answered by digging a bit deeper. In doing so, I found an affidavit which offers significant details into the murder of Sharon Gregory. The following will come directly from portions of the affidavit, which you can find in whole in the show notes. Quote, following is the text of Greenfield Police Captain Joseph P. LaChance's affidavit summarizing events before and after the murder of Sharon Gregory on October 24th, which established Mark Branch as the chief suspect in the crime. I am a police officer with the Greenfield Police Department. I have been so employed for over 20 years. My rank is captain. On October 24th, 1988, at approximately 12:30 p.m., I was notified that the Greenfield Police Department had received information of a death at 138 South Shelburne Road in Greenfield. The report was made by the wife of Greenfield Police Officer Henry Burns, who had learned of the death through the deceased sister. Greenfield Police Officer Jack Needs was sent to 138 South Shelburne Road with another officer. They found the deceased, identified as Sharon Gregory, in the upstairs bathroom at that address. A content warning. The following contains graphic descriptions of murder. Listener discretion is advised. Preliminary examination of the deceased at the scene showed evidence of multiple stab wounds about the back and the head, and that the deceased's throat had been slashed. There was a large amount of blood in the bathroom and outer hall, as well as traces of blood on the stairway. The weapon used to inflict the injuries was not found at the scene. The deceased was clothed. Detective F. Peter Clark spoke with the deceased sister, Cheryl. She resided at the same address with the deceased and her parents. She told Detective Clark that the deceased had recently been concerned about an individual named Mark. The deceased had told Cheryl that she was frightened by the manner in which Mark stared at her. Cheryl said that she did not know Mark's last name. but that she had been to his residence. Cheryl and I proceeded pursuant to her directions to Meadow Lane in Greenfield. She pointed out a house, which is 112 Meadow Lane, as being the house at which Mark lived. Later, I went to 112 Meadow Lane, a single-family home, with Detective Clark and Trooper Leonard Crossman of CPAC. We went to the door and knocked. The door was answered by Mrs. Branch. Detective Clark knew Mrs. Branch to be the mother of Mark Branch, who Detective Clark knew from an investigation several years ago. Mrs. Branch responded that Mark Branch was not at home, but that he did live at that address. She said she had seen Mark Branch that morning at the house at about 10:30 a.m. She had then left to go shopping and had not seen Mark Branch since. Prior to 10:30 a.m., Mark Branch had gone to and returned from a meeting with his counselor at the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission. Mrs. Branch described Mark's motor vehicle. It is a gray Chevrolet Chevette in good shape. At 6:25 p.m., Michael J. Rockwell of 144th South Shelburne Road, Greenfield, which is the residence directly west of the deceased residence, telephoned the Greenfield Police Department. He then came into the department, where he was interviewed by Sergeant Edward Paramba and Trooper Timothy Sicard of CPAC. Mr. Rockwell told the officers that at 12 noon on this date, he had just begun to watch television when he heard the sound of a car door closing. The sound came from the driveway to the east of his house. He looked out his window and observed a dark gray Chevette, possibly two-door, parked facing into the driveway. The front end of the Chevette was about even with the walk going from the driveway to the front door of the residence at 138 South Shelburne Road. Mr. Rockwell observed a white male, approximately 6 feet tall, approximately 180 to 195 pounds, with dark hair. Mr. Rockwell said the hair was a long military cut. He did not see any facial hair. The man was wearing jean-type pants, a jean-type jacket, both of stone-washed or acid-dyed color. The man was clean-cut. The man had his hands in his pockets, and Rockwell watched him walk to the front door of 138 South Shelburne Road. The man was not wearing glasses. Between about 3 and 5 minutes later, Mr. Rockwell again heard a car door from the direction of the driveway at 138 South Shelburne Road. He looked out the window again and saw the same person seated in the Chevette. He heard the engine start and saw the Chevette back out of the driveway and head west on Shelburne Road. Approximately 30 to 40 minutes later, Mr. Rockwell again heard a car in the same driveway. Looking out, he saw Cheryl's car pull in. Moments later, he saw police cars arrive. Yesterday, October 24th, 1988, at about 5:30 p.m., Troopers Sicard and Leonard Crossman met with Scott Landry and his father at the Greenfield Police Department. According to Sicard, Scott Landry identified himself as a close friend of Mark Branch. According to Trooper Sicard, Scott Landry provided the following information. Scott spent October 24th, 1988 with Mark Branch from about 8:15 a.m. until 11:30 a.m. At 8:15 a.m., Scott Landry picked up Mark Branch at Mark's house, in Scott's car, to bring him to an 8:30 a.m. appointment at Massachusetts Rehab in Greenfield. Scott saw Mark Branch's gray Chevette at Mark's house at 112 Meadow Lane that morning when he picked Mark up. Mark had said he had no gas, and there was an air conditioner in the rear that required repair. Mark declined to drive. Scott Landry dropped Mark Branch off for his appointment by the Barrett and Baker Stationery Store on Main Street. Scott next saw Mark Branch at 9:15 a.m. by Galvin's Liquor Store in Greenfield on the corner of Ames and School Streets. They drove back to Mark Branch's house. They got the air conditioner from the back of Mark's car and put it in Scott's father's truck, which Scott had been driving. Both then went in the truck to Scott's house at 15 Maple Street, Greenfield. They arrived between 9:45 and 9:50 a.m. According to Scott from his interview with Trooper Sicard and Crossman, they went inside to Scott's house and began to record MTV. At 10:07 a.m., Sharon called Scott. Scott answered. She was crying. She asked if Scott had a car. He told her he did not. He asked her if everything was okay, and she said that she was not sure. She said she had tried to call her boyfriend, Chris Therian, at Greenfield High School, but he was not allowed to take her call. Scott told her how to start the car and to call back if it would not start. According to Scott, she never called back. Mark Branch asked Scott who had called. Scott told him that it had been Sharon Gregory and that she had been unable to start her car. Mark Branch asked why her parents had not brought her to school at Greenfield Community College. Scott told Mark that Sharon's parents were working and not at home. About 15 minutes later, Mark Branch went into Scott's father's bedroom to make a telephone call. According to Sicard, Scott said he came out a few minutes later. Scott asked him what was up, and Mark said only that he had to make a call. In the next 20 minutes, Mark asked Scott to take him home to get his car, to pick up his check at Stop and Shop. Scott took Mark Branch home and left. According to Sicard, he and Crossman went to Stop and Shop during the evening of October 24th. They were informed by the manager on duty that Mark Branch was employed there, but had not picked up his pay voucher that day. According to Sicard, Scott Landry told him that he went home after dropping Mark Branch off and took a nap. About noon on October 24th, Peter Janist came to Scott's house and woke him up. He stayed about 5 minutes and left. Scott's girlfriend arrived at about 12:30 p.m. Scott Landry told Sicard that he received a telephone call from his mother, who told him that a girl had committed suicide. He went out to look for Cheryl's boyfriend, Peter Janist, but could not find him. Scott went to the high school and met Chris Therian, Sharon's boyfriend. He told Therian that one of the twins had committed suicide, but he did not know which one. Therian and his mother then went to 138 South Shelburne Road, where Trooper Sicard met them. Scott Landry told Trooper Sicard that Mark's blue jacket was in the back of his father's truck when he dropped Mark off at his house. He told Mark to take it, but Mark said he would be by to pick it up later, after he picked up his check at Stop and Shop. Mark Branch did not come back while Scott was home. Scott Landry further told Trooper Sicard that Mark Branch would at times wonder aloud how it would feel to kill someone. Scott told Sicard that Mark religiously tapes and watches horror flicks and smut. He named Friday the 13th and Halloween. Scott said that Mark patterns his own life on characters from these films, including Jason from Friday the 13th and Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street. Scott told Sicard that Mark Branch owns 7 hockey masks. Such masks were worn by Jason in the movie. According to Scott, Mark does not play hockey. He also has the same kind of combat boots and shirts as are worn by the main characters in some of these movies. Scott Landry told Sicard that he and Mark had hung out together since 3rd or 4th grade. He said Mark had attended a school for troubled kids, and that Mark's mother had once told Scott that Mark had attempted suicide. Scott also said Mark had gone to Belmont State Hospital for about a year between his 16th and 18th birthdays. He also attended a special school in Northampton for young people with mental or emotional difficulties. Scott Landry told Trooper Sicard that Sharon and Cheryl Gregory often mocked him and made fun of him in his presence. Within the last week, Mark Branch had said to Scott that these 2 girls had angered him. Scott Landry told Sicard that Sharon Gregory had taken photographs of Mark Branch, and that Mark had told Scott that he wanted those photographs back. Detective Peter Skerritt returned to the 138 South Shelburne Road after 11 p.m. on October 24th. He found 2 photographs of Mark Branch under a box on top of a desk in the deceased room. Detective Clark interviewed Amy Poliatis on October 24th, 1988, in the afternoon. Miss Poliatis is Scott Landry's girlfriend. She is 18 years of age and a student. According to Detective Clark, Miss Poliatis told him that she knows Mark Branch. She said further that Mark was an admirer of the movie Friday the 13th and of its character, Jason. Miss Poliatis told Detective Clark that Scott Landry and Mark Branch would watch violent movies such as Friday the 13th at home. Mark talked about living out a fantasy of being Jason, the character from the series of Friday the 13th movies. She also said that Mark had shown her items he had purchased through the mail about Jason from those movies, and that he kept these items in his room. These included dolls of Jason, the hockey mask used by Jason, and videotapes of the movies with Jason. I am familiar both personally and from discussions with Sergeant Paramba with the series of movies beginning with Friday the 13th. They revolve around a character named Jason. Jason was a person who was himself indestructible. He brutally killed people with knives, axes, swords, and similar implements, often causing multiple stab wounds. Detective Peter Skerritt from the Greenfield Police Department spoke with Thomas Smith, M.D., who conducted the autopsy of the deceased. Dr. Smith said, upon first impression, that the instrument which made the stab wounds in the deceased was likely a single-edged knife, with a blade width of approximately 1 to 1.5 inches, and a blade length of between 4 and 5 inches. Death resulted from multiple stab wounds, numbering about 24. Detective Skerritt saw the deceased's motor vehicle license, which showed a birth date of 3/26/1970. At 8:20 a.m. on October 25, 1988, I, Joseph LaChance, received a call from Diane Tuller of Avery Road, Buckland, Massachusetts. She is an employee of Crocker Answering Service. She stated that a gray Chevrolet Chevette was parked off the road on Avery Road near the Wilder place. Officers were dispatched to the area. The car was located and secured while this affidavit was prepared. Thereafter, I received a telephone call from Detective John Zakowski of the Greenfield Police Department. He stated that he had interviewed Francis Wilder of Avery Road, Buckland, Massachusetts. Mr. Wilder said he left his house at 11:45 a.m. on October 24, 1988, and returned at approximately 1:45 p.m. on the same date. When he returned, there was a gray Chevy Chevette parked off Avery Road in Buckland, which had not been there at 11:45 a.m. He saw no one near the vehicle. Police officers have searched the woods near the vehicle, but have not found its operator. Based upon my observations of the deceased at the scene, and the amount of blood between the first floor and the bathroom where she was found, I have cause to believe, based upon my many years' experience in investigating crimes of violence, that the clothing of the deceased attacker is likely to have the deceased's blood on it. Furthermore, a shoe print was identified in the blood on the bathroom floor. Detective Clark spoke with Cheryl Gregory again on October 25, 1988. In August 1988, Cheryl Gregory was present in Scott Landry's living room with Scott and Mark Branch. Mark had some papers with him and told them it was a psychological profile done on him. Cheryl asked to see it and looked it over. She asked to take it home to read it. Mark said that was okay, but he did not want anyone else to see it, and she was to burn it when she was finished reading it. After Cheryl took it home, she cut Mark's name out of it. On Saturday, October 22, 1988, Sharon got a phone call from Scott Landry asking if Cheryl still had Mark Branch's psychological profile. Sharon went to Cheryl and asked if she had it. Cheryl told her it was on her bedroom floor. Sharon then told Scott Landry that Cheryl still had it. Scott said Mark wanted it back. Cheryl told Detective Clark that she last recalls having seen the psychological profile on her bedroom floor about 3 days prior to October 24th. Detective Clark and Cheryl searched for the document, which is an 8.5 by 11-inch document of several pages in length. They were unable to find it in the house where Sharon Gregory was killed. Also in August, Cheryl had a conversation with Mark, who bragged about having 12 different masks that he had sent away for, and that last Halloween he had dressed up as Jason, and somewhere around the Greenfield Middle School, he had jumped out of the bushes with a knife and chased a girl. The girl ran, and he said he fell. He told Cheryl that if he had not fallen, he would have stabbed her. He told Cheryl that because he was unsuccessful, he planned on trying the same thing this coming Halloween, 1988. Cheryl Gregory said she left for school at about 8:45 a.m. on October 24th. Both parents had left earlier that morning. Sharon was coming out of the shower when Cheryl left. Cheryl left the front door unlocked. I am told by Chief McCarthy of the Greenfield Police Department that Scott Landry has stated that Mark Branch collects all sorts of knives. On October 25, 1988, a search warrant was issued by Greenfield District Court Clerk John Johnson for the Chevy Chevette registered to Mark Branch and located off Avery Road in Buckland. The vehicle was towed to the Massachusetts State Police Barracks in Shelburne, where it was searched by police officers and a chemist from the crime laboratory of the Department of Public Safety. During the course of that search, the chemist identified blood in the vehicle in areas including the accelerator and brake pedals, steering wheel, automatic shift lever, emergency brake lever, driver's side outdoor door handle, an inside handle, the carpeting on the driver's side in the front, and the plastic console housing the shift. According to Lanny Parrott, the manager at Stop and Shop where Mark Branch is employed in Greenfield, Mr. Branch was scheduled to appear for work at 9 a.m. on October 26, 1988. He did not appear for work. Officer Wynn of the Greenfield Police Department went to 112 Meadow Lane, Greenfield, Massachusetts, on October 26, 1988. Based on this information, there is probable cause to believe that Mark Branch brutally killed Sharon Gregory with a knife or other sharp instrument, and that the killing was modeled on killings in movies such as Friday the 13th. There is also probable cause to believe that Mark Branch keeps copies of such movies and collects paraphernalia, such as hockey masks and boots, used by the killers in those movies, as well as a doll of Jason from the movie Friday the 13th. A search warrant is therefore sought for the premises at 112 Meadow Lane, Greenfield, for videotapes, paraphernalia, and souvenirs for horror films such as Friday the 13th and Halloween, and characters in those films such as Jason and Freddy Krueger. Such souvenirs and paraphernalia to include hockey masks, dolls, knives, and sharp instruments, and combat boots. Also sought are any documents showing possession or control by Mark Branch of the premises at 112 Meadow Lane. End quote. In the immediate aftermath of Sharon Gregory's murder, and as Halloween approached, the town canceled all festivities. Police were inundated with phone calls from residents claiming they'd seen Mark Branch around town. Mark's car was found, abandoned, in nearby Buckland, with the inside covered in blood. But Mark Branch was nowhere to be found. The manhunt for Mark Branch lasted for over a month. As media coverage offered more details into the case, and into Mark's background, residents grew increasingly frightened. As they learned of his obsession with horror movies, they grew worried that he would return for a Halloween-style massacre. Trick-or-treating times were moved from the evening to the daytime, and a local movie theater canceled the showing of the newly released Halloween 4. But Halloween came and went without incident, and Mark Branch was still nowhere to be found. As the days turned to weeks, the leads went cold, even when famed psychic John Monty involved himself in the case. Until late November 1988, when, quote, a hunter discovered Mark Branch's body hanging from a tree in the woods of Buckland, end quote. Something interesting. The medical examiner determined, based on the partial decomposition of Mark Branch's body, that he died by suicide shortly after murdering Sharon Gregory. With the discovery of Mark Branch's body, you'd think the investigation would be closed. And in the technical sense it was. but where the life of Mark Branch ended, the legend of Mark Branch was born. One article stated, quote, adding to the horror motif of the Mark Branch story, a local legend in the Greenfield area says Branch didn't kill himself in the woods. Instead, a local mob of vigilantes, akin to the townsfolk of Frankenstein or the citizens of Springwood in A Nightmare on Elm Street, found Branch and enacted their own justice before the police could locate him. People claiming familiarity with the case say Branch had help hanging himself, which sounds ominous, but not out of the question. Though it would take a significant amount of restraint for the entirety of Greenfield to keep quiet about killing a mentally ill young man. End quote. I'll admit, I'm not a fan of the theory that horror movies caused Mark Branch to murder Sharon Gregory. Culturally, the paranoia makes sense. In 1988, the country was still enraptured by the Satanic Panic. When the public found out about Mark Branch's horror movie obsession, it became all too easy to point at his choice of entertainment and scream, "It's Jason Voorhees' fault." But possible correlation is not the same as absolute causation. It's possible the Friday the 13th films gave Mark Branch the means to commit murder. He did, after all, dress up as Jason Voorhees. But it seems a stretch to say Friday the 13th caused Mark Branch to murder Sharon Gregory. Especially when you consider his mental health history and his friends' reports that Mark had always been interested in killing someone. I've said it before. The scariest monsters are human monsters. The one who you walk past in the grocery store, or who smiles at you while walking down the street. Mark Branch's demons got the best of him, and the consequences were tragic and horrific. As we close this episode of The Red Treehouse, we're left with this lingering question. What compelled Mark Branch to murder Sharon Gregory and commit such a heinous crime? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.